Hey, I'm Debbie Stoller. Welcome to Stitch Image TV. I'm going to tell you about decreases that you need to know how to do if you want to knit lace. Now, you know when you make lace, what makes lace lacy are the holes, and the holes are created by yarn overs. But each yarn over is also an increase, and unless you want your fabric to keep growing and growing and growing, you have to throw some decreases in there. In lace knitting, almost every yarn over will be counteracted by a decrease. Sometimes a single decrease is used to counteract one yarn over, or at other times a double decrease is used to knock out two yarn overs. You may have already learned about decreases leaning to the left or to the right. And in the past, if you accidentally used the wrong decrease, it really didn't matter. But in lace knitting, it really matters. Decreases are often used decoratively in lace patterns, and which way the decrease leans will make all the difference in how the fabric looks in the end. All right, so I want to show you a right-leaning decrease first. It's called a knit two together, and you make it just like it sounds. You're going to knit two stitches together. The way you do that is you just insert your needle into two stitches knitwise at the same time. So I'm inserting my needle into both of these stitches at once, right? Knitwise from left to right. And then wrap your yarn and come out, and I've just knit two stitches together. That's a right-leaning decrease. Now I'll admit I used to have the hardest time remembering which decreases leaned right and left until I learned that whichever stitch you put your needle into first is the one that's going to end up on top in the decrease, and that can really help you remember which way it leans. So for instance, with the knit two together, you insert your needle into the second stitch on the needle first, right? Because you're knitting those two together, you're doing it that way. And that means that that second stitch ends up in front, and you have a right-leaning decrease. It actually kind of makes me think of ballerinas. Like you can see here. Here's two ballerinas. The one on the left is leaning over the one on the right. She's the second stitch, and obviously this decrease leans to the right. So I want to show you a left-leaning decrease. My favorite one is called a slip-slip knit, and it's a little bit odd. You slip the first stitch on the needle from the left-hand needle to the right-hand needle as if you were going to knit it. Right, so I'm inserting my needle as if I was going to knit this stitch, but instead of doing that, I slip it. And then you slip the next stitch the same way. Okay, and now I'm going to do something very strange to knit these stitches. I'm going to insert the left-hand needle into the stitches on the right-hand needle. Usually you're always doing your right-hand needle into the stitches on the left, right? But in this case, we're kind of going backwards. I'm inserting them into the front of those loops, and now, look, I'm almost in a position to make a regular old knit stitch, which I'm going to do. And that decrease is called slip, slip, knit, and it leans to the left. And if you look at the ballerinas, you'll see the stitch on the right is the first stitch. It's leaning over the stitch on the left. It's in front, and it's over the stitch on the left, and so you have a left leaning decrease. Double decreases are fun too, and they can lean to the left or the right, but there can also be a center double decrease, kind of like a tripod. But let me show you how you make all of them. All right, a right-leaning single decrease was knit two together. A right-leaning double decrease is knit three together. You insert your needle into the next three stitches all at once. Sometimes be a bit of a jam, as if you were going to knit them, and then you knit them, all three of them together. And that decrease leans to the right. The first stitch we put our needle into was the third stitch, so that's the leftmost stitch. So that leftmost stitch is going to end up in front of the other two, and you see we have a right-leaning double decrease. Then the left-leaning double decrease is, maybe you could have guessed, slip, 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 knit. I'm inserting the needle into the fronts of all three of those stitches, and then knitting them together. And that decrease leans to the left. The first stitch you put your needle into was the rightmost stitch on the needle. That's the one that ends up in front, and just like these ballerinas show you, that results in a left-leaning decrease. The center double decrease has the kind of horrible name of slip two stitches together, knit one, pass, slip stitches over. Don't worry about the name. It's really easy to do, and you don't really actually ever need to use the name. You start out by inserting your needle into the next two stitches, just like you were going to do a knit two together, right? Inserting them both. But instead of knitting them, we're just going to slip them. So that's slip 2 stitches together, and it's really important that you do them together and not one at a time. Then we knit the next stitch, and then you're going to pass those 2 stitches that you just slipped over the last stitch you just made, kind of like binding off, right? And you get a really nice little center double decrease. Remember, the first stitch I put my needle into was this second stitch on the needle here, right? To slip those 2 guys together. That means that that second stitch is the one that ends up in front. And if we can bring the ballerinas out for one last time, they will show you the middle stitch is in front of the other 2 stitches, and you have a nice centered double decrease. So those are the most commonly used decreases that you'll need to know if you want to knit lace. For more techniques, tips, and tricks like this, plus a whole bunch of patterns, check out Stitch and Bitch Superstar Knitting. Go beyond the basics.